start with some introductions to get to know you all just a little bit. So here's the first question. How, when, and why did you become involved with peer support and the peer community? So who wants to go first?
I can start.
Well, doesn't matter.
Go ahead, Mike, please.
Okay. Well, I was doing a lot of work in Annapolis in 81, 82, testifying on legislation dealing with mental health issues, specifically patients' rights bills. And I was on the board of a group called Threshold Services, which was part of Threshold Alliance for the Mentally Ill of Montgomery County, which is now known as NAMI Montgomery County. So I was doing a lot of work for them, and I kept running into a woman by the name of Peg Sullivan, who started a mutual support group called On Our Own in the Baltimore City County area. And so Peg and I became pretty close friends. And in 1982, she got funding from the Mental Hygiene Administration. And it was from the Community Support Program at the National Institutes of Mental Health to hold a statewide mental health consumer peer conference, which I was invited to be on the steering committee or the planning committee for this conference. And so I became more involved with PEG and On Our Own and met other people from the Mental Hygiene Administration. And we had this statewide conference in June of 82, the first one ever in the United States that was actually funded with federal money. And we had over 200 people from all over Maryland. And, our keynote speaker was Judy Chamberlain. For those that don't know, Judy Chamberlain's is an author of a book called On Our Own, Patient-Controlled Alternatives to the Mental Health System. And that's where the name On Our Own came from. And the conference was quite successful. And the following year, PEG got money from the Mental Hygiene Administration to open a drop-in center in Baltimore City. And she asked me if I wanted to come and be like the assistant director, and I agreed. And so that's how I got involved with On Our Own. We were doing peer support groups and other stuff. And one of my tasks was to help mental health peers in other counties in Maryland to organize their own self-help groups. And so I started with Montgomery County and Howard County in a program called Even Keel in Montgomery County. And so that's how I got involved with peer support initially.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Bunky or Vicki?
Well, I'm always impressed by people who can remember where they were in what year, and I can't be specific about years and things, but the way I got involved with peer support was that I was pretty deep into an episode of depression. And my diagnosis is clinical depression. And so I did what people like me usually do, isolate, a lot of isolation. Then somehow I found out about a support group in Baltimore County. Carol Ann was the leader of the group, and the group was quite large. I mean, it was 25 people, and it was in person. And so we had quite a large circle. And I went to that first meeting and thinking that, I would be in a group of people, but I would be kind of lost in a group of people. It was less intimidating than going out with a friend or a couple of friends. And So I participated in that meeting and came away from it feeling much better. And when I came home, my husband reminded me that when I came home that I was smiling and saying it was a really good experience. And he felt so much relief at me saying that. So I was in that support group for several years, and eventually became a substitute for Carol Ann. There was another member, and I both were substitutes for Carol Ann. And so that's how I got involved in a leadership role, was doing that. And then at the time, that group was part of a larger network called DRATA, which was initiated by Johns Hopkins, by Dr. Ray DiPaolo, and two nurses that he worked closely with. So I trained with the coordinator to become a facilitator. And then at some point, I started my own group. That was, a bit of a leap for me, for someone who's spent a lot of time hiding out. But I did enjoy the work, and found that it was good to be able to provide that service for other people, but it was also good for me. And I find that still, these many years later, that participating in a support group and actually facilitating one is a good support reminder for me of the positive messages that help other people. They continue to help me. So that takes you from the beginning to now, I think.
Wow. What a journey. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Bunky?
I actually found out about peer support totally by accident. I was someone who had been really sick with depression and in and out the hospital for about a good 10 years. And through the day program that I was attending, when I got comfortable and got on my feet there, they offered you jobs within that program. So I excelled at most of the jobs that I applied for there. I got to be so good at some of the jobs that sometimes I kind of thought I was staff. And so I spoke to the director because we had a good rapport, and I asked him, couldn't I be a staff person? And he told me no, that clients could not be staff persons, that I needed to, build my confidence at the day program, and they would get me ready to go back to the community, which really frightened me to death. So after many times of asking this director, can I be an employee there? He came to me with some other consumers. I didn't know that word back then, but he came to me with some other actually friends of mine and says, I have this grant and I wanted to give it to someone who can run something on the call Lower Shore Friends. And I'm like, well, I don't want to do that. But I did listen, and they said, you'll just be doing it on the weekend. You'll be showing a movie. You'll be having some pizza, and you'll just be talking with your friends the way you do at the program, but you'll be getting paid for it. And I took it because I needed the money. And it was just the weekend. And I felt like, well, I'm still in my safe zone, because where we would have the movie and pizza and the conversations was at the day program. It just was no longer staff. I was the, pardon me, I was the leader. So it really, that was the catalyst that really started it. But still, I didn't know what I was getting into. When the day program told me it was time for me to start being on my own, a friend of mine, a colleague who actually works for me now, told me that you and Mike were coming to the library in Easton to talk about honor, owner, Merlin, and peer support and advocacy. And I'm like, what in the world is this? And who are these people? I had no idea. But I went because my friend is still a good friend, and I trusted her. And I knew if she said there was people for me to meet, even if I didn't join this group or stay with them, I was going to meet them. And from the beginning, when I met you guys, I really felt like I found out where I belong, or the people who will help me get where I belong. I was really, and this is not to, go too far, but I was really, really impressed with Mike. I just never heard nobody talk like that. I never heard nobody talk about mental illness in a positive light. And it made me seem like I was in that light too. And then or I could be. And then when I started talking to you, and I've always told you this, came to an anti-stigma class, it was like the clouds opened and the sun came out, and I realized who I was. I was not what people said I was as far as anything negative. I was somebody who had a lot to offer to the community, but I had to accept the fact that I had to offer it back to my community, the mental health community, the addictions community, the veterans community. I didn't necessarily belong in that wider population. I needed to concentrate on people who were like me, who understood me, who welcomed me, and I felt the same toward them. So to you both, I owe you an eternal thank you, because you really changed my life for the better. I would not be sitting here without either one of you. And, we've had little changes, little differences in opinions on different things over the years. I don't care about that. What I really care about, the fact is that you guys took me in and embraced me and helped me be the leader I become today. And I thought I would never, ever say the words leader concerning me. And there was one time where I thought I would just be in a day program for the rest of my life. So I'm an independent human being living with mental illness now.
Wow. And such a wonderful leader in your own right. I mean, it's amazing.
Jennifer, you guys helped shape me. Every workshop, every retreat, every summer conference, every anti-stigma, everything you gave me fortified me to help me be the person I've become. So I was able to, after being in you all's company for so long and learning and training and learning with my other colleagues from the other centers, then I was able to go back to my home communities, Worcester, Somerset, and Wycomico, and be a strong person and advocate at the table and talk with some confidence and have facts to back it up. MHA said this, BHA said that. We can do this. We have rights. And I knew I had the power of people, not just you guys are on our own, but the whole network. There was a bunch of us who felt this way. So I was empowered.
Wow. Y'all are going to make me cry, and we're only 15 minutes into the conversation.
I know, and I just feel so great to finally get this off my chest.
Oh, this is great. So we're going to talk a little bit more about moving further into leadership in just a second. And thank you, all three of you, for telling us about the beginning of your own peer support, peer community journeys. It's really exciting to hear and to reinforce the power of peer support and what that means to people, and how impactful it is. Mike, let's go back to you for a second, because you were talking about the early days and getting involved in the peer community. Talk a little bit about when you came into the leadership role at Honor Out of Maryland.
Sure. Well, like I said before, I started working for On Our Own Baltimore. It was the only On Our Own group in Maryland at the time. In 83, we opened a drop-in center in July of 83. And like I said before, one of my job responsibilities was to reach out to other mental health peers, mental health consumers in other parts of the state, to help them start their own On Our Own support groups. So the first group was Montgomery County. I was living there at the time. And there was a couple people, Brian Disher and Christine Music, that were very interested, and their families were part of NAMI Montgomery County at the time. That's how I met them. So I started working with them and helped them find space for their support groups. And they actually got space via T. Arthur at Montgomery House on Saturdays. T. Arthur used to run Montgomery House back in the 80s. And, you know, that was great. And then I was able to give them introductions to the Mental Hygiene Administration's regional director for the Southern region, Dr. Sandy Beenan, who many of you know. And Sandy was able to get them a grant from the Mental Hygiene Administration to start Honor in Montgomery County officially. And he arranged for the county to give them a building in downtown Rockville for $1 a year, which was great, you know. And so that was our next On Our Own group. And I worked with a lady in Howard County by the name of Judy Mullinex, who started On Our Own of Howard County. And then we also had a group in Montgomery County called Even Keel, which was a group for people with depression, bipolar disorder. And they all sort of became part of our state network. Because like I said before, I was doing a lot of legislative work in Annapolis during the General Assembly session, testifying on legislation, patients' rights, budgets, all kinds of stuff. And so it became a priority that we started to have representatives from the existing these groups, Howard County, Montgomery County, Even Keel, On Our Own, Baltimore, et cetera. And we started having meetings at the Wild Lake Interfaith Center in Columbia. And we started to call ourselves On Our Own of Maryland, because there was the Mental Health Association of Maryland, and you had NAMI Maryland, and you had a group called the Maryland Association of Psychiatric Support Services, which is now CBH, or Community Behavioral Health Association. And so that's sort of how I started getting involved in the leadership role, because I was coordinating all of this, and I was chair of the steering committee for On Our Own of Maryland. And so that was, we made an impact. We were a coalition. We were able to get more funding for community programs. Most of the money coming out of the Mental Hygiene Administration at the time in the early 80s went like 95%, 90% went to state hospitals. Very little was in the community. So we were able to get, one year we got $3 million extra from Governor Harry Hughes from our coalition. And that was sort of the start of, you know, this coalition of statewide mental health groups. And I was usually their representative in Annapolis when we had meetings, and I had a leadership role. And, you know, it was just great. And one of the great things about doing this is we got some recognition from the federal government, from the National Institutes of Mental Health, from their community support program. And they asked us and gave us funding to host the first national conference for mental health peers, or consumer survivors, as they called it at the time. And so we got a big grant from NIMH via the Mental Hygiene Administration. And we organized this national conference. We had over 400 people coming to Baltimore in the summer of '85 at College of Notre Dame. And that really gave us a great big push, not only here in Maryland, but nationally. And following that, we decided that we wanted to spin On Our Own of Maryland off as a separate nonprofit, because we were a project of the original On Our Own group in Baltimore. And so we applied to the federal government again, and they gave us a 3-year grant in '92 to officially start On Our Own of Maryland as a separate nonprofit organization. And the steering committee became the board of directors, and I applied to be the executive director of On Our Own of Maryland. And they hired me, and I've been there ever since until I retired at the end of 2020. And this was 1992, the fall of '92. And we opened our first statewide office in March, I think it was March of 1993. And we've just been growing bigger ever since. And, you know, in 1994, we wrote this grant to hire somebody to run this little stigma project that we had going. And, you know, we were just getting started, and we got some money, and we put an ad in the paper, and we said we wanted somebody with public policy background, and media background. And sure enough, who should apply for it but somebody by the name of Jennifer Brown. And
Wow.
she hired in '94, and she's been here ever since, doing great stuff. And so that's how I got involved and became executive director of On Road to Maryland. And we've done a lot of other things. We started Main Street Housing. We have a RAP program and a transitional age youth program and a bunch of other stuff going on. But anyway,
it's growing and growing and growing. Thanks to, you know, your solid leadership all of these years. I mean, my gosh, what a trajectory of a career of leading an organization that was also leading the way in a lot of ways in the system. So I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
I was just saying, we've been fortunate to have people as the director of the Mental Hygiene Administration over the years that supported us. And we were able to get funding later on to expand the network and create on our own groups in other parts of the state. You know, similar to what Bunky was doing down in the Lower Shore, we were able to get funding for programs at the Midshore area, in Cecil County, Carroll County, Howard County, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, and over the years, we now have a network of peer operated consumer organizations, self-help groups throughout Maryland. And we're one of the few states that has that, actually.
That's actually a perfect segue, Mike. Thanks. Because one of the next things I'd like to hear from you all is about the biggest priorities of your organization and the biggest challenges of your organization. Who wants to take that first? Vicki, I see wheels turning.
Well, as far as the biggest challenges, well, let me start this way. What you're able to do with your organization or program, local program, depends a lot on other people in your chapter, people who are interested in being trained facilitators, and who become part of your board of directors. As small as ours is, there's more energy in it right now than I've ever experienced before. So we're just starting out together, but there are 4 people plus myself on our board. It's a challenge to recruit people to the network, and it's a challenge to have enough support groups in Baltimore City that people don't have to take long bus rides. It would be wonderful to have support groups every 3 or 4 blocks, like AA, for example. There are AA groups all over, but not DBSA support groups. And I would love to increase the number of groups so that people could go to one in their own neighborhood. That has not happened so far. And I remember too, I guess I was a little naive. There for several years, I was in the process of building our chapter and building additional support groups within the chapter. And we just increased and got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then suddenly we lost a group. And that was very hard for me. I thought, well, there must be something we can do to prevent this from actually happening. And now I realize that it can happen, and you just have to accept it. In, I think it was Anne Arundel County, we had 2 facilitators, and both of them withdrew from that role. They said, you know, we use Zoom all day at work, and we simply cannot come home and spend the evening using Zoom. It's just too much. We just can't do it. And there was nobody else who would take over that responsibility. So in my time as the president of the chapter, we have lost 2 groups that we have not been able to regenerate. And I've had to accept that myself personally, but that doesn't stop me from trying to start additional groups. It's just that it's hard. And I have very mixed feelings about Zoom. To me, a little rectangle with somebody's picture in it is far different from a human that you can sit next to, hand a tissue to, you know, give a hug. It's just not the same. At the same time, I realize if it were not for Zoom, I think our chapter would be a lot smaller than it is, even having lost 2 groups. It gets complicated. We lost 2 groups because of Zoom, but if we didn't have Zoom, I don't even know if we would have a chapter at all. So it's a mixed bag. There are a lot of people who want to be part of a support group and want to benefit from being part of a support group, but they don't want to be involved beyond that. And, you know, that's perfectly acceptable. We all get involved in it for our own reasons and to help ourselves in whatever way we think is possible. And I think in most organizations, you have a large population and a few people who are willing to take on more responsibility than that. So one of the things that we're doing right now is setting policy. And that was, I wouldn't say it was a heated discussion that we had among the board members, but it was a sincere exchange of ideas. And they were not all in agreement. And finally, me being the president of our chapter, 2 of the board members said, well, you know, finally it's Vicki's decision. And I had been listening intently and I thought, okay, I guess I signed up for this, but it's not a lot of fun. And I ultimately responded by saying, I think when you reflect on how long we've been discussing this at this meeting and how it's taken all of our time to discuss this one issue, and we had an agenda of maybe 4 or 5 other issues that we have never gotten to. I believe that getting involved in these court arrangements is a bit beyond us. And I have always maintained that you never sacrifice your group for one person. Your allegiance is to the group. And if you have a person that is creating such problems, no matter how nice he seems to be or anything else, you do not sacrifice your group for this person that you're giving so much attention to, and where you are really in deeper than you know how to handle. And I thought, now, are these 4 people on the board? Are they going to accept? You know, they said it was my decision, but are they going to accept my decision? And they did. You know, so this idea of having these people who can have varying opinions and state them in a civil way, that's another thing. It was not a extremely emotional discussion. It was very civil. And I compliment them for that. It's not something you run into these days all that much. So here we were, a relatively inexperienced group of people dealing with a difficult, not a simple, but a difficult issue, and doing it in a civil, reasonable way. So I really commend those folks, and I look forward to working with them, you know, at least for this year and maybe longer. Mm-hmm. So I hope it gives you some insight into that's the answer to your question as far as we're concerned.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So that sounds like that is a very challenging set of circumstances, and certainly one that where leaders have to make tough calls. Mm-hmm. And to be able to do that in a way that I believe you called it a sincere exchange of ideas at one point, where there isn't rancor and where people can express themselves in a way that there's still a lot of respect, that you don't see that everywhere. And and congratulations on that, because that tone is often set by the leader. And so I would, congratulations.
Thank you.
It sounds like you've got a wonderful group that you're working with. That's great. Mm-hmm. Bunky, opportunities and priorities of your organization and challenges. Priorities and challenges.
Well, the main priority is survival. It's always survival and always being relevant and always trying to be on, I'm not gonna say the cutting edge, but you're right there when things are happening. You know, one thing I learned at Lower Shore Friends is, because I was the only one in the Tri-County area doing what we do, I taught myself not to be so afraid to try something new. Because I figured that if I tried it, whatever level of success I had or didn't have, it's up to the next person to do better. But somebody has opened the gate and said, here's a way you can go. So I've had the challenge over the years of having things thrown at me and shaking in my boots and shaking all the way to the success line. I remember way back, I think it was like 96, 97, and Somerset County was my core service. They were the ones who gave us our monies. And I had one of the most wonderful core service directors there then, and now she's working for social services. But anyway, she calls me on the phone one day and she says, Bunky, you're going to do a conference. I'm like, okay, she's not feeling good. You're going to do a conference. I'm going to give you $2,500. You're going to have speakers. You're going to talk about peer support, and you're going to talk about stigma, and you're going to talk about your illness, and you're going to do this at the college, and you're going to probably have about 100 people come. And I asked her, why are you telling me this? Because you know I can't do it. And she said, Bunky, you're going to do it. I'm going to be behind you, but I'm going to push you out there. When it comes to our population, when it comes to our people, I want us to shine and always show the best. And so once I grasped that I'm going to do this, sink or swim, I said, then I want a piano in the room. And I want someone to play piano at lunchtime. And she thought, Bunky, who in the world is going to play piano? I said, I know a consumer at the day program who is brilliant. He doesn't do a whole lot of other stuff, but when you give him a piano, he's a maestro. We paid him $75. During our lunch, he played the most beautiful music. And then you helped educate the Lower Eastern Shore on stigma. And I talked about my own issues with hospitalizations. And Kim Allen came and talked about the Black perspective and her perspective as a woman, et cetera, et cetera. And that was just, and to hear the applause, to me that meant, well, they like what you're saying, they heard what you're saying, and they're thanking you by giving you this applause. So I was like, oh my God, I'm shaking for a different reason. I'm so happy that this is really, really working. So the priority is always, me being here today was a priority because the pandemic has slowed us all down. But Jennifer, when you call, what do? I come. It's just that simple. I always show up when you want me to do something because I feel like I owe you such a debt of gratitude. I told you more than once, let me say probably more than once during this video, showing me the door to what anti-stigma is broke down so many barriers that will stop me from living a complete life. Some of the stigma, but even I was putting on myself because it kind of been ingrained in me. And you were able to, in your wonderful way, able to crack that glass. And I came out and I'm like, I'm a new person. I'm none of those things. I'm new. So that really, that's just all a part of the priority. Sticking with my network, taking care of my home base. And being relevant and keeping my face out there when I can. And when I do something important, that's hopefully because of how things have changed, a lot of people are going to see because I'm not a big Zoom person. But I know even though I may not be there, a lot of people, especially new to the network, are going to hear this and see it. And hopefully when we all come back together, those people will remember me and everybody else in this video and come up to us and we can help inspire them in person. So that's where personality kind of comes off. Because if I really had stayed in my more protective mode, my more insecure mode, I would have just kept that center there and been isolated. And everybody would have saw us and saw people go and come and might not never know what we were. But I made it my business and I still do. I go down, introduce myself to neighbors. I make sure the place has a beautiful look to it. And when we have cookouts and something like that, even if our neighbors aren't a part of the mental health population, I invite them as well because somebody in their family may need that help. A friend of theirs may need that help. And once we're all having lunch over a barbecue grill and we're handing out pamphlets, et cetera, that message is helping somebody. And somebody's going to walk into the center and say, my mom was at your cookout and she saw this brochure on depression and she said I should come talk to Mr. Bunky. And I'm like, you're at the right place, I'm Mr. Bunky.
I mean, there are a lot of people who are peers. They just may not call themselves peers. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, we're talking about 1 in 4 people. If it's not us, then it's somebody we love or care about or somebody in our community. And it's really, this is an issue. Behavioral health issues, as we all know, are impacting all of us in some way, whether it's directly or indirectly. So the peer network is big. And as you said, us being able to really relate to people in our communities and treat people so that they know they matter and that their voice matters, and them being welcomed into a place like Lower Shore Friends or DBSA or Honor Own of Maryland and being welcomed in there and being really heard. Oh my gosh, what a piece of not only our own humanity, but of recovery.
I think of individuals when I think of stigma. For myself, I have had so many good experiences that most people haven't had. For one thing, I guess the first thing is that I've been hospitalized several times. And the first time I was hospitalized at the state hospital in Cambridge, Maryland, on the Eastern Shore. And, most people have predetermined idea of what state hospitals are like. We often have conversations or discussions in our group meetings about when to tell people that we have a mental illness or exactly what it is. And that's always a stimulating discussion because there's no one right answer. And normally, your employer is one of the last people that you reveal to, but there are conditions where you have to because you need some accommodation on the job because of your problems, and you need someone in authority at your job to agree to the accommodations. You have to pick and choose among your friends who you want to share that intimate information with, because there are friends who are genuine friends but simply cannot handle that kind of information and don't know how to be your friend in that respect. They're still your friend, but they don't know how to deal with that illness. So, it's complicated. It's very complicated, and that's just on an individual level, never mind a societal level.
Absolutely. It's wonderful to hear, an individual experience that's been positive, because certainly we hear about a lot that are not, and, with organizations and structures and policies and as you said, and the community at large, and who you tell, who you don't tell, and how people are treated. So it's interesting that you mentioned even an institution can be stigmatized. There's a stigma attached to, in your case, it's a state hospital, and so they can be stigmatized too. Mike, I'm wondering if you certainly had a lot of experience with helping to right wrongs, if you will, of dealing with tremendous stigma, discrimination, and abuse in some of the organizations and institutions throughout your very long tenure. Could you maybe speak to stigma on that level? On a,
Sure. Well, the discussion reminds me of going back to the early 80s again, when On Our Own got funding from the Mental Hygiene Administration to open a drop-in center. And the funding came from the federal government. It didn't come from state funds. It was money that was awarded to the Mental Hygiene Administration to give to On Our Own, but it was federal money. So it was through a program called the Community Support Program, which was a federal program that had their own staff at the Mental Hygiene Administration. So they gave us this money, and unfortunately what happened was that, stigma-wise, back in the early 80s, the consumer movement, the peer movement, we were it. That was it. And so, they weren't used to having peers involved in discussions about grants and funding and systemic mental health policy issues. And so we were the first. I remember going to a Mental Hygiene Administration annual conference, and I was the only consumer there. And they asked me to talk a little bit about stigma actually at the conference, which I did. And so it was challenging. And then talking about state hospitals, we were approached by a lawyer at the University of Maryland School of Law by the name of Michael Milliman. And he asked us if we wanted to sponsor a 10-week program on the legal rights of people in psychiatric hospitals along with him. And we did. And we had it at the University of Maryland School of Law in the moot court room. We had like 150 people take the course. And the dean of the law school spoke, and different psychiatrists and lawyers and all that type of stuff. And that was in the fall of 82 to early 83. And after we had that course and Professor Milliman got more of an earful of what was going on in the state hospitals, he approached us us meaning On Our Own, and asked us if we wanted to join him and file a class action lawsuit against the state of Maryland, against the Mental Hygiene Administration, on the basis that people in state psychiatric hospitals had less rights than people in prisons. And we did that. We joined this lawsuit. It was filed against the Mental Hygiene Administration. It's called the Co lawsuit. And it was eventually settled out of court in a federal consent decree in 1985. But between 83 and 85, we came, because we were part of this lawsuit and because we were ex-mental patients and all this, that, and the other, the director of the Mental Hygiene Administration got on a bandwagon to defund us. He wanted to pull our federal money. But it was all stemmed from stigma. But what came out of that was the fact that this woman, Allison Carter, within the Mental Hygiene Administration, the Community Support Program, said we really needed to start a stigma project, an anti-stigma project, looking at stigma within the mental health system itself, you know, how providers and people within the administration look upon people who are mental health recipients, ex-patients, current patients. And so that's how On Our Own eventually got grant to start an anti-stigma project. And when On Our Own of Maryland spun off as a separate nonprofit, we got more money. And that's how we started an anti-stigma project. And Jennifer, was hired, and we've been going, gangbusters ever since, throughout the past several years since 1994. And Jennifer, you've been all over the country, California, Arizona, Connecticut, even other places like Canada, et cetera, doing stigma workshops. We even did them in Wales, England, and France. And so the stigma projects is quite well known nationally, even to the effect that in 2001, SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, gave us a big grant to hold the first ever national symposium on discrimination and stigma for the United States. And we did that. And it was a big challenge, but it was well worth it. We had over 400 people from around the country and Europe attend at the Renaissance Hotel in Inner Harbor. And it was a lot of work, but even today, discrimination and stigma is still prevalent throughout society, in the behavioral health system, et cetera. So there's always work to be done, but stigma has been a big deal. And, and you just got to keep fighting and, keep up the good work, stuff like that, keep the workshops going and educate the public.
It is a constant battle. And it takes different shapes and forms. I mean, it's interesting whether it's personal, whether it's a system, whether it's society. I think sometimes it becomes more subtle, and certainly great strides have been made. Partially due to people like you, Mike, who have really, who were able to really fight some really egregious wrongs that were happening. To really call attention to the pieces that were happening that a lot of people didn't know were happening. And I think even now, folks today may not even realize just what was going on as recently as 20, 30 years ago, and what changes have happened since then. So I think there's also been an evolution of stigma as well, where we might not see it as blatantly as it was then, but sometimes it becomes very subtle, but still very powerful and very insidious. And I think you're absolutely right. We have a lot more work to do, so that more people are having positive experiences like Vicki had, and not taking those messages and internalizing them. Thank you, Bunky, for bringing that up. I mean, that's a huge piece of stigma, is when you start to believe it, when you start to buy into it.
Yeah. Can I add something else?
Absolutely.
About stigma. As everyone was talking, I was taking in what everyone was saying. Sometimes, at least in my life, I believe you can be born into stigma. Because being a Black person in America, there's just so many things that people have always said. And as somebody growing up in the world and hearing the things and all that kind of stuff, even to this day, it's very, very hurtful. It's very hurtful how people can be lumped into one group. And because one person may do something bad or against the law or something, everybody gets that tag. Even with women, women, I think, Jennifer, you just opened just a wide door for me, because there's just so many different kinds of stigma. That's the amazing thing, and people don't know it. I think all of us have been victims or dealt with it in some kind of way. But if I can, I'd like to tell you, hopefully, 2 little stories about when I faced stigma. And here's one. When I became the director of this program, what I really had to understand is not just through what Mike's teachings were, but I had to really understand the system on the local level. So I made it my business at Mike and other people's advice to join more local boards to find out what was going on and get the consumer voice out there. Well, I remember one day I went to, I'm not going to say where, I went to a local health department in my jurisdiction, and I went to the desk and I said, where is the Citizens Advisory Board meeting? And the lady had her head down when I came up to the desk. It's one of them things with the clear thing, and it's like a hole to speak through. And I was like, where's the Citizen Advisory Board meeting? And she had her head down, and she was steady writing. I said, excuse me, where did you say that meeting was? And she looked up at me and she said, the men's addictions group is across the hall. And I looked across the hall, and there were these guys sitting in there, I guess they were there for addictions, but I'm like, what do I have to do to be respected? Because it just baffled me that that's what she would, not hi, not hello, not what did you say again? She just assumed that I was there for the men's addictions class, which really did piss me off. So I told her, I said, excuse me, I'm here for the Citizens Advisory Board. So then she's like, well, who are you? Because I guess they knew all the usual players. And I just said, I'm Bunky Sterling, I'm a new member. She said, oh, get the elevator and yada, yada. And I did it. And then at some of those meetings I went to, I remember someone I've learned not to say names anymore, but I remember someone said when we were going around the room doing their customary, I'm so-and-so from this organization. And when I said, I'm Bunky Sterling, director of Lower Shore Friends, this person said, who invited him here? And that, you know what, here's the beauty of it. Now that you want to know who invited me here, you know what? I'm going to be chairman of this group now. So you'll know who invited me here because I'm going to invite you. How you like that? So I made it my business to get on the Wicomico County Board, to get on the Somerset County Board, and to get on the Worcester County Board. And I don't mean for 5 minutes. I mean for years. I'm talking 2 years in Somerset, probably 5 years in Worcester, and maybe a 3 or 4 in Wicomico. So I'm like, well, if you don't know who I am now, by the time this is all up, we'll know. So I was able to sit to the table, and when things came up, I'm like, a lot of people don't think that. And then when people were talking about things they want the consumers to go to, I'm like, wait a minute, that's not for them. We have an on our own conference we want to go to. On our own conference, they said, I said, yes, I want people to go there, and we need you to help pay for it, and you ought to come too. And that started the catalyst for that. I have to say, and I'm going to say names on this one, Jennifer LeMay at the Worcester County Health Department, they were so pro-consumer from the beginning, because there was a many time they can tell you that I sat to their table and certain individuals did not want me there. One time, matter of fact, I was asked to leave. And they asked me, who's that dumb blonde you brought with you? And you know what, Jennifer, I did not blink an eye. I went right and told the director, they have insulted us. We belong here. You invited us. And he made a big deal out of it to go to the microphone and say, this group is the future. And he did an exercise that we had to write a newspaper headline that would be on the front cover of the Worcester County paper in 10 years. And I remember mine so well. I wrote headline in bold type, Lower Shore Friends partners with the Worcester County Health Department to bring the On Our Own Summer Conference to Ocean City, Maryland. And Jennifer told me, you'll see that happen.
I'm wondering what your biggest piece of advice would be for people who are new to leadership positions, who are just now starting their careers in leadership positions in terms of peer networks and advocacy. What would be, from your years of experience, your best piece of advice for them?
Can I jump in?
Absolutely.
I would say, first of all, to any new directors, get with someone who's been around a while. Find someone to help mentor you if you're not sure on sure footing alone. Reach out to another colleague for assistance that can help you, who's been around, who knows about the conferences and knows about the system better, to kind of mentor you in. I think that makes a whole lot of difference. To any new consumer coming into the mental health world, if you want to call it mental health community, I would say, number one, welcome. The second thing I would say is you are among friends. This is the most welcoming community I've been in. Going to the On Our Own conference, it was all out of all the places I go and feel nervous and shaking my boots, I go there and I'm just as free as a bird because I know I'm 100% around my people. We don't care how different you are, how you walk, how you talk, how you look. You're here for the same reason. You're here to learn. You're here to fellowship. It's really all about love there. It's I am so sad that it's not back yet, especially when it's right in my own backyard, but I would travel anywhere that they had them. I absolutely love those conferences. But back to the new people, get involved, understand your illness, definitely take an anti-stigma class, and really support the directors. So when someone has the courage to come to your program or try to be a director or be a board member, embrace them and you all embrace each other. And let's not make this a war within ourselves, because that's the one thing we need to show everybody, that we can love each other and protect each other. We don't have to air our dirty laundry, and we don't have to ruin people who are most of the times just trying to do the best they can.
Oh, beautifully said. Thank you, Bunky. Thank you.
Well, I would say that talking to people who are just becoming directors of local peer groups, local on our own groups, or whatever their name is, if they're brand new, I think my experience over the years, one of the key things is to really have a good working relationship with the local mental health authority, the court service agency. That'll help, build the bridge. And if there's problems, you can go to the local mental health authority and say, can you help me with this? Or if you have an individual consumer, and I know Bunky over the years, a lot of people would come into his program and say whatever it is, and Bunky could reach out because he's well connected in the community to the local mental health authority or wherever, and get that person help. And I remember one story where Bunky told me about a lady living in a trailer, I think, who needed an air conditioner. And Bunky went to the local mental health authority and got some discretionary money to buy the lady an air conditioner, so she didn't have to sweat to death, in the summertime. So one of the key things is to, make yourself available, build friendship, build bridges with the local mental health authority, because in the end, that will go a long way in helping your program survive.
Thanks, Mike. And Vicki, final thoughts and advice.
Well, in our chapter, especially now, our focus is on Zoom support groups. Otherwise, we do things outside of our support group meetings, like have an annual picnic or meet people to go out and get supper somewhere together, to have contact with each other outside of voicing our concerns and difficulties and mental health challenges and so on. But we have been more restricted during COVID than that. But I would say, at least in our organization, we have guidelines that we read before every meeting, or I should say, when we convene our Zoom meeting, the first item on the agenda is reading these guidelines. And some of the trainers will say, these are nothing more than what your mother taught you about how to be courteous and nice to people and so on. But they really are more than that. It would be interesting to follow the development of guidelines. These guidelines are wonderful, you know. It seems like they just came out of the air, but of course nothing does that. Even with computers and broadband and all of that, things don't literally come out of the air. There's probably some lengthy history of developing guidelines for certain types of organizations, and certainly for support group meetings. If someone is new to the meeting or gets carried away with how they're conducting themselves, rather than correcting a person directly, we can say, you know, we have read the guidelines at the beginning of our meeting, and one of our guidelines prohibits this type of acting during a meeting. And it makes it a little less personal, makes it a little less of a personal attack.
Right.
And it also reiterates the value of the guidelines. They're not just nice little throwaways that your mother taught you. They're there to be used, and they're there to be very helpful once you've acquainted yourself with them. So I would encourage a new leader to realize the value, to come to several meetings and see how they're applied. And it's hard to say where the beginning is, but certainly during the time of Jane Eyre and so on, people with mental illness were considered very other. You know, they were considered creatures rather than people. And then in the 1700s, I learned by doing a little research, there was a French psychiatrist who was in the leadership of a inpatient psychiatric hospital, who decided to treat the patients as people deserving of kindness. And what a tremendous change that was. And not only did he do that, but he sometimes hired some people who had recovery from mental illness to work on the staff. And what a tremendous change that was. And you can just follow that up to all kinds of individuals who tried to institute good care, to the peer support networks that exist today, and how, you know, each of these steps was very significant, you know, to the point where when they pretty much emptied the psych hospitals and put people in the community with inadequate resources, that's when the patient movement started the peer network.
Absolutely.
So Absolutely. It's really fascinating when you think that we went from being these creatures who were stuffed in the attic and kept away from other people to where we are now. And then, like you say, we still have stigma and we still have a ways to go. So,
but it's still, you brought up a good point, Vicki, and I think it's a great place to end, which is, it really is about, one, people supporting each other, and that idea of people, you know, having a voice, people, their voice matters, they're welcome, and that they can be decision makers, and that the peer voice is so important, and the network is important, and peer support is important, and we have, you know, data that shows that, but also that everybody is deserving of kindness. You know, I love that phrase, that is so true of all of us, and that is one of those things. Is, you know, you were saying earlier, it might seem simple, it might be something that hopefully somebody taught you growing up, but boy, it's easy to forget. And sometimes the things that are so simple are the things that are really profound. And so thank you to all of you for being here today. Thank you for all of the work that you have done for so long, and are continuing to do. You've made such a difference. And I thank you for what you've done, who you are, and you're very appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you. Nice to meet everyone.
Nice to meet you.
Likewise.
Our mission is transformation. Through mental health or substance use challenges, we found our voice. With 30 years of experience in peer-run alternatives, person-centered training, and systems-level advocacy, we empower agents of change, lifting up leaders with lived experience to shape the future of healthcare. We are on our own of Maryland.